Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to talk about quill brushes and how you can use them to loosen up in your art, warm up, and get better brush control. They can be a little unwieldy because of their thick belly and long bristles, but they are a workhorse in your watercolor practice. So I'm going to show you a couple different kind of practices I was doing this morning. This one here, kind of like a little bouquet. I was just kind of playing with flower shapes, and I ended up with something that looked like an English rose and something that looked like a peony and some random blob here, but I was really enjoying just playing with this brush. And then I had this one that was not so hot because, you know, you just gotta play without editing yourself and really enjoy the process. If you were going to go run a marathon, you wouldn't just lace up your sneakers for the first time and run out the door. No, you would train and you would stretch and you would get yourself in shape. And that's what you're going to do when you practice. And I haven't been painting with watercolors much over the past couple of weeks because I've been focused on my pastel course. So I thought it would be nice for me to get out these brushes, really practice, have fun, and break myself back into it. This one I noticed that if I tapped my brush, I would get these cool chrysanthemum petals. That was a lot of fun. And what I ended up deciding to teach you today is a kind of a whimsical flower. And I want to show you these quill brushes. So I'm going to show you what you get if you were, or what I got, painting the same picture pretty much with a number 0 quill brush, which is equivalent to about a number 10 watercolor brush. I can grab one to show you, I think. I just had one. Here it is. So this 0 is equivalent to a 10 round. So keep that in mind when you're shopping. And this is actually an old one. I've had this for about 20 years. It was a gift from my mother, and it is actually a Winsor Newton squirrel quill. I don't buy fur brushes, but if I have them in my stash, I use them. I don't see the point in throwing something away that's useful. But nowadays there are really good synthetic options. This is a Princeton Neptune number 4 quill, which would be equivalent to like a 16 or so. Let's see, yeah, 16, about the same body size, ferrule size. The bristles are a little bit longer, so you can hold a little bit more water. It's a little more flexible, and it's going to give you a little bit more of a loose feeling. But if you have round brushes and that's it, go ahead, use your round. Try to find a synthetic squirrel though, because the floppiness of those brushes and the thirstiness of that brush is going to give you those really expressive strokes that we're talking about. And this is a golden taklon, which is very, very springy, versus the synthetic squirrel, which doesn't really want to spring that much. But that's going to help you hold a lot of water and give you that sort of feeling and carry so much paint, so you can do those expressive leaves and petals and whatnot. So this was done with a number 4. I had a much easier time getting in with details and doing thin lines and stuff, but even done with a number 4, you can still get those thin lines pretty much. They're just a little bit more awkward. So you do get a little bit more of a delicate look with the number 0. And that is a pretty decent sized brush. That's like a number 10. So if you're a beginner, I'd recommend starting with something like a number 0 so that you have a little bit more versatility. So the paper that we're using today is simply a piece of 6x9 Aqua watercolor paper folded in half. I recommend that paper a lot because it is 100% cotton, and it is, but it's cheap enough that, because you get 50 sheets for about $15. It's cheap enough that it's not going to be too precious if something doesn't go okay. And when you fold them in half, they make the perfect little note cards. So, you know, you could send somebody a card, and I think that's really a nice thing to do. This month is International Correspondence Month, I think. So, I think that's kind of nice. I'm just going to turn my palette around because I like having my reds to my to my left. It's weird, I just do. So I'm going to start off by taking some carmine red, and that is a cool red. So if you have my chart from last week, go for any cool red, crimson, permanent rose, whatever you have. And I've got quite a fair bit of water in there, okay? Now I'm going to add a little Prussian blue because I want to make a violet that's a little bit earthier, kind of like a mauve color. Okay, and I think I want a smidgen more water. Okay, now my brush is fully saturated, so I'm going to have plenty of color here to paint my flower. So what I'm going to do is I am going to paint a flower, and I'm going to be concentrating on kind of like an outer row of petals. So if I think of like these rose bushes that we used to have growing up with all sorts of rose bushes on a property, they would just have these really big blossoms and have these really big petals, and that's kind of what I'm going for here. On your whimsical flowers, they can be whatever shape you want, but that's what I'm going for. And now I want to get a little bit of shading done while I'm at it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of scrape my brush off onto my dirty water container and remove a little bit of color. I'm going to grab a little bit more carmine, a little bit more Prussian, make a little kind of like a eggplanty color. And I'm just going to give it a little bit of, have a little bit of shadow in here. Thinking about the kind of the ball of petals in the center, and then the ones that are kind of opening them up, kind of like a teacup and saucer. Okay, a teacup and saucer, and I'm painting the teacup area, just little round strokes. And if you have a puddle of water, now I wouldn't really be concerned with it, but if you had a puddle of water and you were concerned with it, then you can dry your brush off, and you can just set it into the puddle and soak it up. Just like that. That's not really much of a puddle. I really wouldn't worry about it. So while that's drying, we can work on some other areas. Now while I have a little bit of red still on my brush, I'm going to grab a little bit more from the dry pan. These are Student Grade Schminke Academy. Use whatever you have. The Cotton Sketcher box would be fine for this. Really doesn't matter. I need more water. See how that's not even enough to let it come off my brush. So you do need to run your brush fairly wet if you want to be able to get any sort of detail and have the color come off your brush. But I think that is a really good practice to get used to using a bigger brush and used to using a wetter brush. So I'm just going to kind of throw in a few loose rosebud shapes. Just to give me the idea of what I want there. I'm going to clean my brush. Now I have one bucket of water for my dirty water, and I've been painting already, so you can see it's pretty dirty. Really giving that a good stir. I wouldn't do this over my painting, but I just want to show you how I'm cleaning that, because these brushes are extremely thirsty and hungry, and they're going to take in a lot of pigment and grab onto it, so you want to make sure you get that out. And then as a little extra insurance, go into the clean water, and then just kind of press it against the edge of the jar to get the excess out. But it should come to a nice sharp point like that when you have a good tension of water. I'm going to mix up some green, and instead of using the hooker's green that's a pretty good earthy green, I want to actually mix some of my warm yellow, and this could be gamboge, this could be cadmium yellow, could be Indian yellow, whatever warm yellow you like. And I like to mix my greens this way. If I'm not using a sap green, I like to mix my greens with a warm yellow and a single pigment green. So I'm using phthalo green, which uses the pigment PG7. Sometimes it's called Verdian hue, but when you mix those together, you get a really pretty color. And it's nice and light and fresh and natural looking. So my brush has soaked up all of that. Okay, it's holding a nice point, so I know I have a lot of paint in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my brush near the tip because I want some control. If you hold your brush back here, you'll have less control and it will be looser. So if you hold it back here for loose marks, hold it up here for controlled marks. If you're working on a small note card like this, you probably will need to hold it up near the top so that you have more controlled marks. And now I'm just going to scooch this over a little bit so my wrist, I have room to move my hand if I want to. I am going to start on the tip next to the flower and start with a little bit of a line. Then I'm going to press and give myself a nice big leaf. A lot of times I like to do a couple different strokes just so I get like a curve on my leaf. Look how nice and plump that is. Doesn't that look healthy? And then I can usually do quite a few leaves. Oh, that one just already had a bump on it, and I like that, so I'm going to leave it. And I just kind of build a little pattern of leaves. Start with a little stem, a little push, a little lift, and I got a leaf. And this is where your brush control is built. This is where you start learning about controlling your brush. Let me put one over here. You press that way down, and you get that nice fat leaf. Use a couple strokes if you need to. And I just love the kind of lyrical quality that you get when you do your leaves like this. And you can fill this up as much as you want. You can try pushing the leaves away from you. You could try pulling them towards you. Usually pulling them towards you or pulling them towards your dominant hand is a little bit easier. We could throw in a couple over here. Look, we're still just using that, that same batch of color that we mixed. Oh, that's a pretty one just on its own. Smaller leaves you probably will do with one stroke just because you won't really have room to do more than that. You throw in dainty little stems. That's so pretty. Now what I can do is actually mix the colors together and get kind of like a earthy green color that I could make some stems for my flowers. Just barely licking the paper with the tip of that brush. Super, super, super gentle. Okay, now I'm going to see if the center here is dry. Oh, it still feels cool to the touch when I touch it with the back of my hand, so I know it's not fully dry. So I'm thinking maybe I want to add something a little different to this painting. Maybe I'll put some berries in here. I think that would be kind of pretty. So I'm just going to clean my brush, rinse it in the dirty, rinse it in the clean, blot it off. Maybe we'll do some berries. Let's just do the red on its own. We will need a little more water on our brush so that it's going to be responsive. You know, this is where it's a little tricky. You don't want it so soupy that there's just going to be a blob and go out of control, but you also want to have that you want it to come off your brush just fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make some circles and then press. So make a circle and press. If you just kind of like outline it and press, your brush will just kind of fill it up. There. And that's going to take a little while to dry because those are kind of raised up. I'm going to pick up a little bit of that blue that we were using before. And I think I want to make just some little stems. I think I need to blot a little bit off though because there's so much pigment in the berries that I'm getting. There we go, getting a little too much in there. I don't know if I like that or not, but you know, it's there now, and we'll see when we're done. Maybe we should have left the white space, but we'll know later. All right, I need to dry this before I can go over with another layer. Otherwise, I'm going to end up with some kind of like backgrounds, and I do have a little bit of blossoming in there, but I'm not worried about that because that can help us guide where we're going to put our petals. It can be a nice guidepost when you have stuff like that happen when you're painting in a loose style like this. Okay, so the key to this next thing that we do is just not to overdo. So I've got my carmine here, a little Prussian blue in there to darken it a little bit, and I am going to just kind of throw in some loose medium-sized petals, so not as big as the first ones I did. And then I'm going to pick up more paint that's a little bit thicker, a little bit drier, and I am going to go towards the center and just kind of like I'm painting the edges of the petals, and I'm letting that color kind of swoop in and get mixed in with the other colors that I have there. Okay, now I think I maybe want a little bit of red in there, carmine on its own. And I like to just tap it on the palette to make sure it's dispersed in the brush, because this brush is so, it's so big, like there's so many hairs in there, you want to kind of make sure you don't have a clump. You want to get it in there so no matter where you put your brush down, you're going to get some pigment off there where you want it. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to the leaves, which hopefully are dry enough. I think so. And we're going to make a darker shade. So again, I'm going to take and this is how I clean off the Prussian blue. I'm going to take that first, because if it has a little bit of crimson in it, that's fine, because it's going to be a nice natural darkening color. In fact, I'll just grab a little bit of that we mixed up there. Okay, so my brush again is pretty juicy, and this time I'm going to go in and just do like half of each of the the leaves. Kind of like how rose leaves kind of like are folded in half. And this is a great practice on getting like one half of your stroke flat and the other half of your stroke curved. So I'm doing this so the center of the leaf will be straight and then the other side will follow the curve. And that's just a matter of brush control and how much you press and how you drag your brush. Okay, and I can go ahead and give little, give some little buds or hips to these little rose buds up here. And however much pigment you have on your brush, how much water can determine on how thick your lines end up being. You need enough pigment on there for it to be sharp, to get a sharp line, but if you have too much and it just drops, it can drop a little too much pigment at once and then you'll end up with more than you need. Alright, I need a little bit of yellow. I like to have a little yellow in my my green. And you can throw in little dainty, these little petals up here, they remind me of little arms saying hello. Up there, you could throw a couple little tiny little leaves in there while we're at it. Just using the tip of the brush. I mean, this is a pretty big brush, so, you know, you might end up with some blobs. But I just, you know, just try to kind of trust your intuition and paint what you think needs to be there. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, but at least you tried. And oftentimes it looks better the next day. You know, you'll think, oh, what a hot mess, and then you look at it the next day and it actually looks pretty good. So try not to be too hard on yourself. I'm sure it will look fine. And even those crazy berries there, I think will be fine when I'm all done. Okay, the next thing I want to do is add a little bit of yellow to the center of the flower. Make sure my brush is good and clean. Cleaning them in both buckets here. And I'm going to go in and grab some yellow. Pretty pasty. And I'm just going to be tapping it in the center so I don't have to worry too much about you know, not having enough paint to pull a stroke, because I'm not pulling a stroke, I'm just kind of tapping. And then I'm going to grab some more yellow and spatter it like I did on my others. It might make a mess with the berries, but we'll see. It probably will. I'll just try to avoid the berries a little bit. And you don't have to do that if you don't like spattering. But I do, I like it. And then we will dry this, and we will put a few more little details on the flower bud. Alright, the berries aren't completely dry, but I'm not going to worry about them. I'm going to just flick some water onto my paper. I'm going to grab some red on its own, and I'm just going to go in on the tip of my brush and add in some curved strokes here to give the flower a little bit more shape. I'm going to add a little bit to my buds up here. And I am going to mix that with a little bit of the green that I was using to make almost like a blackish green. And I'm going to go in and throw in some veining. You don't have to do it to all of them. That one's got a big splat on it, so I don't want to do it to that because it will just run. And I'm just pretty much just putting the veins on the shadow side if I'm going to put them in. You don't have to put them everywhere. You can even go in, like a little bit too much paint on my brush, you can even go in and throw a few, not many, just a couple little accents in the shadows of the petals if you want to. And that is pretty much it. And the fun thing with doing practices like this is that you're never quite sure how each one's going to turn out, but it's fun and it's a great way to warm up. I really like the first one I did better, and that's usually what happens, like the first of a card that I paint or first of a painting that I do when I'm just like fooling around because I'm not worried about it, usually comes out the best. But the technique's the same for all three of these. Just change up your brushes and see what gives you what. And try not to get too dark in the beginning because that can hinder how your picture comes out. If you would like more information on painting loose watercolors, then check out my course, Loose Watercolor Workshop. I'm sorry, Watercolor Floral Workshop, and I have a tutorial there. Thanks for watching. And until next time, happy crafting.